Hello, Geography 232 students. How is everybody doing this evening or this afternoon or this morning, whenever you're doing this? Hope you all are doing well. Let's see, a couple of announcements, nothing too major this week. This is our final lecture and lab for the class. If you look at your syllabus, next week is actually what I had originally scheduled to be just an open lab period. So time to work on projects, time to finish up any outstanding labs that you may have. And so I'm just going to keep that on the schedule since we only have 2 weeks before presentations. There's no reason to shoehorn in another lab. So this will be the final one. I think it appears to be a fairly short one actually, which is sort of ironic, kind of to end with a whimper instead of a bang. But essentially, what we're just going to be doing this evening is learning how to share models, how to customize models for sharing within toolboxes inside the ArcMap environment. And then the final exercise, you're going to learn how to export a model to a Python script so that you can share that, because sharing Python scripts is one of the most efficient ways to essentially share custom-made tools in ArcMap environment. So we've obviously spent our short period of time on Python. If you end up taking 231 in the fall, we'll do a little bit more Python, but I highly encourage you to seek out an additional Python training course online if you can find one. There actually are several of them, not just through like paid for services like Coursera and Esri, but just a bunch of kind of free trainings you can find through YouTube and through Open University type classes as well. So I highly recommend you looking into Python to do a little bit more research on that, because it's just such a useful programming language and it's a marketable skill. It looks good on a resume and it really is helpful in the GIS profession. That also. Zoom meetings have been going well. For those of you who have contacted me, we've set up meetings, we've chatted, gone well. I pretty much limited them to 30-minute chunks, and that's worked out just fine. If we need more than 30 minutes, just let me know. But so far, that's been all right. Obviously, we have our final presentations on May 18th and likely the 20th as well. That will be facilitated via Zoom as well. So make sure that you are comfortable with Zoom. I'm assuming everybody has, if you haven't used Zoom, you've at least used FaceTime or Google Duo, something to that effect. But make sure that you have Zoom downloaded. It's a free program. You're going to have to run it, obviously, when we do our presentations. And those are going to be held during our regular class hours. So Monday, May 18th, we're going to block out 6:30 to 9, just like it was a normal class. And if enough students commit to presenting their projects, which I haven't heard back from everyone, that's my final note to go over. If everyone commits, then we will likely have to present on the 20th as well. And as I mentioned in the announcement last week, you have to be present for every presentation. It's just like if we were doing this in class. You can't present and then not show up for the remainder. It's rude. You have to think of the final person presenting. You don't want to present to just an empty room. It's the same thing online. You don't want to present to just me. We want to be able to have everybody participate and offer critique and questions and answers and all that. So make sure you are present and available both days. And so that brings me to my final point. I haven't heard back from everyone yet. I've heard back from about half of you. And so I won't name names right now in the audio, but I will be sending emails to those who have not responded yet. Basically, I just need to know, are you going to present during finals week? Do you need any special accommodation, any help, any one-on-one pointers in using Zoom? Let me know. Or PowerPoint or Google Slides, because obviously you're going to have the actual presentation. And finally, do you have a preference of when you present? Monday is starting to fill up. I've got, it looks like about 2 to 3 spots left. So if you want to present Monday, send me an email, obviously, let me know. Just respond to the message I sent to you all last week. But if I don't hear back from you, obviously I'm going to reach out. And if you don't have a preference, then it's just going to go alphabetical. But if you've already talked to me about presenting Monday, I've got you on the list, you're good to go. That's basically the extent of announcements for tonight. So without further ado, let's get going on working within modeling environments. So setting environment settings so that when you share a model with somebody else, the connections to the actual data can be transported. When we do that, I'll explain through relative paths, but that's really the extent of this. It's like I said, it's a fairly short tutorial and a relatively short lab as well. So, all right, things to be aware of. So, once complex models are created, and obviously what we've been working with so far have gotten to be fairly complex. Once they've been created, either as a geoprocessing task or as a tool, they can then be shared with others. All right, so that's sort of one of the main points. Aside from automating your own repetitive tasks, one of the points of creating models is to be able to share those models with other people. As I kind of framed it before, a model is essentially a miniature tool. It's a miniature program. And so if you've put the work into it and it's relevant to others, you might as well be able to share it with others. And likewise, it's nice to be able to collect these models online from others who have created them as well. I can't count the number of times over the years where I've been trying to do something and there may not necessarily be a tool that Esri created, but some, smart GIS user thought of this same problem and he or she created a model for it, posted it online, and I downloaded it and used it. So these are really tasks that do have real world application, and not the least of which are models. When you want to be able to hasten the time it takes to accomplish something, you don't want to have to create the model yourself if it already exists. So in order to do that, you have to share it as a toolbox. That's what we're going to get into as well. So one important consideration is to preserve the stored paths of the data. So the pathways to the different data that are involved in the model are going to be, by default, specific to your computer. So it's going to be your C drive, and then the file path will be C drive, and then wherever you save the data set. Okay. Now, obviously, that doesn't work if somebody's computer hard drive is set up differently, and maybe they're saving theirs on a USB drive that starts with E or D or something like that. So to get around the problem of paths, of direct paths, is to set them as relative paths. And basically what that does is it lops off the first few directory locations. So gets rid of the C drive, it gets rid of the Esri press folder in this case, and all it stores is the actual geodatabase where it's saved, and then the feature data set, and then the feature class. And so in that case, if you just save relative pathways, then you, as say the recipient of the model, can specify where the data will be saved. And what that allows you to do is avoid having a bunch of broken paths. It's just like when you're working in ArcMap. If you've received data from somebody else and the data are not directed to the sources, you end up with those red exclamation marks, which signify a broken path. You can have broken paths in models as well. So the best way to avoid that is to use relative path names. So let's begin. Go ahead and open up exercise 4A in the maps folder. And right off the bat, we're actually going to go straight to copying a toolbox from the sample models folder, and you're going to paste it into my answers. So sample models, go ahead and maximize that folder. Get rid of that. Sample models, find 4A, copy, then go to my answers and paste it right in. All right, so now we've got a toolbox called Chapter 4A. Then click the expand button, little plus sign, right click on buffer parcels and edit. And we are going to be editing this model that has already been created. So this week's lab is not so much about creating models as it is about prepping them for sharing and then actually sharing them. Okay. All right, so we've got it edited. The first thing you'll need to do is set the system environment variables for the current and the Scratch workspaces. So current workspace is another word for geodatabase. It's a place where your output data will be saved. That's known as the current workspace. The Scratch workspace is an environment in which temporary data, or what we call intermediate data, will be saved. So if you are creating an intermediate file, say for example, in this model here, we run a buffer on selected parcels. It creates an output buffer, but we don't want that output buffer. We want to use that buffer to select features. Okay, so select layer by location using the output buffer. Okay, so this initial output buffer, it's just intermediate data. It's not something we need to keep. So that will be saved in the Scratch workspace. Okay, so in order to verify that the output geodatabases, the Scratch and the current workspace are saved, we need to do that in the model properties. So go ahead and click on the model menu and click on model properties. Then on the environments tab, I'm already there now because I did this before, but yours might have been in general. Click on environments and scroll down to workspace and go ahead and check it and then maximize the box there. There we go. And make sure that current workspace and Scratch workspace are both checked. And then go ahead and click on values. All right, so you'll see the values here. In my case, I thought this was interesting. In the textbook, it says that essentially the goal here is to change the output current workspace and Scratch workspace to these locations. City of Oleander, personal geodatabase, / property data, and then City of Oleander, personal geodatabase, / templates. Well, mine were already set when I did this for the very first time. And so in the textbook, if you look, it'll say C drive, users, / David, / et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, it's saying that the default geodatabases are in the ArcGIS folder, which is common in ArcMap. If you are to ever create a feature class, like let's say you run a geoprocessing tool and create a new output, it'll save it in this ArcGIS default geodatabase. And so that's what you would expect to see. For unknown reasons, the output data were already set to the locations that you should be changing it to. So that's a long way of saying that you actually don't have to do anything at this step, okay? If yours is set to property data and templates, okay? So if that's the case, then you can just click OK. All right, and then OK again here on the properties. And then we can move on to the next step. What we want to do here is right-click on New Feature Class and select Managed. What that does is that now directs the final output feature class, the new feature class oval here. Instead of it asking where it should go, it will now automatically direct it to the final workspace, the preset environment workspace. Okay, so that's what that does. And then you're going to right-click the output buffer data variable, which is the intermediate layer. Also click on Managed. So in that case here, that's directing the intermediate data to the Scratch workspace. And then click it once again and verify that it is intermediate. Okay, so you should have 2 check marks, one for Managed and one for intermediate. If you didn't have this intermediate checked, it would create an actual feature class for you as like an extra layer in your table of contents, but you don't need it. As I explained before, you don't actually need the physical feature class. You just need it in the background to plug into the next step, which is select layer by location. Okay. Okay, if you've done that, go ahead and save your model and close the window. And then just a quick note on environment settings. I'm sure you've encountered environment settings either in my class or in 230. Environment settings actually, in this case here, we just set environment settings for the specific model. But if you're going to be doing a lot of geoprocessing in ArcMap, it actually makes more sense to click on the geoprocessing menu and then go down to environments, environment settings here, and then find your workspaces, and then see, notice how these are all okay. These are already preset for this ArcMap document. This example 4A had already had the current workspace and Scratch workspace set here, but by default these are just directed to the ArcGIS default folders. So long story short, if you want to do a lot of geoprocessing, just choose a geodatabase into which you want to save all your data, and you only have to do it one time. You set the environment settings, and anytime you do any geoprocessing in this particular saved document, whether it be in models or just in free editing, they'll always be saved into these predefined locations. Okay, so environment settings will control the outputs for everything you do. If you're only concerned about the outputs for a particular model, then you just set the environment settings for that specific model itself. All right, so that concludes exercise 4A. We're going to move on to 4B. And just a quick note on this topic here. So as concerning sharing models, you don't actually share a specific model as a standalone item. You actually share a toolbox, and within a toolbox, you can have that specified model or other models as well. There's really no limit to the number of models you can have in a toolbox, but you can't share a model per se. You share the toolbox, and then within the toolbox is the model that you're trying to share. So with that in mind, we will now proceed on to 4B. So go ahead and on your maps folder, double click 4B. And right here in the catalog window, you're going to see a data folder. Okay, so you always have these 4 folders: data, maps, my answers, and sample models. In the data folder, go ahead and maximize that, and then expand the Oleander Fire Department geodatabase right here. In the geodatabase, you'll see base data, response data 2006, and OFD analysis. Go ahead and maximize OFD, Oleander Fire Department analysis toolbox. This is a toolbox here, and you've got 4 models within the toolbox. In this exercise, we want to find out how to share one specific model. So let's say that census count is the only relevant model here. We don't need to share the other 3. Well, you could delete the other 3, but that wouldn't be wise because you'd be deleting your work. Instead, the most logical solution is to create another toolbox and then just copy and paste the census count tool into the new toolbox. So that's what we will be doing. Okay, so go ahead and you can actually leave, depending on your screen size, you can either minimize data or leave it open, but at any rate, you want to maximize the My Answers folder here. Right click, and we're going to go New, and then excuse me, New Toolbox. All right, so by default, the name is editable, and so we're going to call it My Shared Tools and hit Enter. But before I hit Enter, I just have to parenthetically gripe real quickly because I spend all my classes telling students never use spaces in file names. Always use underscores. You've probably heard me say it before. But lo and behold, when it comes time to naming toolboxes, yes, you can actually have spaces. So I'm still not a fan of it because of the inconsistency. It kind of breeds bad habits. But yes, as the book says, we're going to do My Shared Tools with spaces. Just don't get used to it because you never know when ArcMap's going to get ticked at you for putting spaces in your file name. So just be aware of that. All right, so My Shared Tools. Then go back to the OFD analysis toolbox in the data folder, and then we're going to right click on census count, copy, and then right click on My Shared Tools and paste. And let's go ahead and look in there, and if for some reason you don't see it, you can always right click and hit refresh, and then it'll show up. So there it is right there. Okay. All right, so for now, we are going to leave ArcMap on the shelf for just a quick second. We're going to take a quick detour, and we are going to open up a Windows Explorer window. Okay, and so the goal here is to sort of visualize if you wanted to share a toolbox with somebody, how do you do it? So you obviously aren't going to be opening up ArcMap and dragging and dropping files directly from ArcMap into your email. So instead, you're going to open up a Windows Explorer window, then go down to your computer, C drive, Esri Press in this case. Obviously, your data may be saved somewhere else, but in my case, it's in Esri Press, GTK Model Builder, My Answers, and now we have all the toolboxes that already exist, and here is My Shared Tools. Now you can't open this up through Windows Explorer. It has to be through our catalog or some Esri product, but this is what you would just copy and paste into an email, or you could drag it and drop it, or you could zip it if it happens to be very large. In our case, it's very, very tiny, 13 kilobytes. So that's how you share a toolbox. All right. Okay. All right. I'm only going to do 4A and 4B this evening. You'll want to continue on to 4C and 4D. But as I mentioned, very short lab, very short tutorial. Go ahead and continue on to 4C, where you're going to validate a model. And then 4D, you're going to be exporting a model to Python script. All right. And so as far as completing this lab and then submitting it for credit, you will be updating the create new fc.py script to Canvas. So the final output of 4D is a script, a Python script from a model. So you're going to want to go through there, and in order to kind of indicate that you've actually created this yourself and everything, I want you to put a note in there that says your name and geography 230. So right at the top, right above where it says create new fc.py, put in your name and geog 230. I think it just said 230, 232, geog 232. And I'll make sure I include this in the assignment details on Canvas as well. All right, so that concludes the tutorial. This is probably the last verbal address I will have for you all until we meet for our final presentations. So this has been a very long and very interesting semester. I don't know about for you all, but it's felt very absolutely the longest semester I've ever taught in terms of just the amount of activity that's gone on. So we've gotten through it. So congratulations to you all for doing that. And if you have questions, obviously about presentations, do not hesitate to email. I've been obviously communicating with students as I've been getting questions, and so hopefully everyone's questions have been answered. But yeah, so this is the final lecture. So take care and ask questions if you have them. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing everyone's faces on Zoom on May 18th. All right. So until then, have a great one. Bye bye.